Welcome to New Foods. My name is Leslie Cockburn. I'm moderating today. We have a truly extraordinary panel, a bounty of talent up here and real wisdom about food. I want to tell you one very short, optimistic story about food. Some years ago in 2008, 9 months before the collapse of Lehman Brothers, remember in the mortgage meltdown, people were losing their homes. My husband and I were making a film called American Casino. We were in Baltimore on the courthouse steps as houses were being sold on the block, house after house after house. We followed the directions to the neighborhoods where those houses were, went to the first house, found Denzel Mitchell. Denzel Mitchell was losing his house that day. He was a teacher, and as we discovered, as he was packing his toys and his books, also a great gardener. He was most distressed at losing his beautiful vegetable garden. He struggled to keep the house. In the meanwhile, because he then filed for bankruptcy, he then realized that all around him were vacant lots in Baltimore. He asked the city if he could use those vacant lots. He started community gardens. He then started selling to restaurants. Some of the great restaurants in Baltimore started buying his produce. He started 5 Seeds Farm, and now he is a thriving gardener and one of the key food people in Baltimore. So, an optimistic story out of the crash. So today we will open with 2 12-minute presentations. First by Matthew Dillon. Matthew, Director of Agricultural Policy and Programs at Clif Bar. I'm your biggest customer. He previously founded the Organic Seed Alliance, launching the country's first organic plant breeding programs. A true innovator. Second talk will be Jeremy Jackson in the second chair on behalf of Hoyt Peckham, who has a family medical emergency. We're very fortunate to have Jeremy with us. He's a very distinguished marine ecologist, paleontologist, professor emeritus at Scripps Institution of Oceanography at La Jolla, as well as senior scientist emeritus at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama. His colleague, Hoyt Peckham, founding director of Smartfish, promoting sustainable artisanal fishing, and a visiting scholar at the Woods Institute at Stanford. After those 2 talks, we'll turn to one of our great local celebrities, Nora Pouillon, third chair, who opened the first certified organic restaurant in the country here in Washington, and has written the acclaimed book, My Organic Life, How a Pioneering Chef Changed the Way We Eat Today. And she's also been named winner of the 2017 James Beard Award for Lifetime Achievement. Then we have, at the very end, Dr. Oran Hesterman, president of the Fair Food Network, and author of Fair Food, Growing a Healthy, Sustainable Food System for All, PhD in agronomy and plant genetics. Next to Nora, we have Afantchao, leading specialist for ethnic and specialty crops programs at the University of DC, pioneering transfers of knowledge between African and American small farmers and urban producers, and establishing ethnic vegetable markets throughout the region. Then we have Rachel, sitting next to Yao. Rachel Bynum is from Waterpenny Farm in Rappahannock County, Virginia, my county, where she uses sustainable farming methods with all organic inputs and runs a CSA serving a wide area, and she reaches the markets of Washington, D.C. Now, Matthew Dillon.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who put this wonderful summit on. Got to figure this out first. So here's something that you don't see too often in nature, a concentrated pile of seed. There's a reason for that. Seed likes to spread out, to go solo, to travel. Dispersal by wind, water, fur. Seed likes to wander, to adventure, to find that unsprouted space, a place to experiment with the next generation. So it should come to us as no surprise that we can now find lettuce seeds in space. In 2015, NASA announced that the astronauts of Expedition 44 of the International Space Station would be, for the very first time, sampling a red romaine lettuce that they'd grown from seed in space, the fruition of a NASA program called Veg-01. That lettuce variety, called outrageous, was bred on an organic farm in Oregon by an organic farmer and chosen by scientists at NASA and the University of Wisconsin to be the first crop in space, along with a handful of other crops that same farmer bred on that same organic farm in Oregon. Now, don't get too nervous. I know we're here to talk about Earth optimism, not Mars, and I'm not about to give an urgent plea that we should start breeding potatoes for soil inoculated with Matt Damon's gut biome. While I continue to look for, some optimism in space work, and for the humans and the animals and plants that we might choose to go out into space with us, I'm not really ready to give up on the beautiful diversity of life we have here on planet Earth. So what about seeds on Earth? What are we doing with our seeds on planet Earth? And how can our relationship to seeds offer solutions for people and planet? This is one of the things that we're doing here on planet Earth with seed. This slide shows concentration, consolidation, acquisitions in the global seed market from 2003 to 2013. Agricultural crop genetics, a natural resource for which we did not allow patenting prior to the mid-1980s, has become more concentrated than any sector in our economy. 4 companies currently own 65% of our global crop genetics: Monsanto, Bayer, DuPont, and Dow. But those companies are in the midst of another round of mergers: Monsanto and Bayer, Dow and DuPont. And with those mergers, 2 companies will control 65% of our global field crops, and 1 company will control 25% of our global vegetable crops. Now, they say they need to merge in order to be better at solutions. So is this a solution? Let's put aside for a moment a lot of concerns about these companies. Let's put aside, actually for a moment, if concentration in media or banking or any other sector has really resulted in a net positive good, a net public good. Let's put aside for a moment if a group of majority shareholders for agrochemical seed companies, staring at quarterly returns and looking at profitability as the indicator of success, are really the right people to be determining our seed and our food future. It's hard to put aside, but let's put those questions aside for a second. Is this a solution? This is not a sustainable solution for a resilient food future for all of us. Resiliency in terms of ecological sustainability, economic vitality of our rural communities, cultural integrity of our food systems requires robust diversity. Diversity not only in crops and in crop genetics, but diversity in the actors, those who are solving for seed, those who are working with seed, a diversity of stakeholders speaking up about what our food future should look like. Simply put, this is not a solution because the shareholders do not see adequate return on investment for diversified, smaller scale, low input farmers, urban gardeners who don't fall easily into a speculative agricultural commodity system. This solution already is leaving farmers, food communities, and nutritious crops underserved. At Clif Bar, we believe that we need a diverse, decentralized public plant breeding system with independent distribution system. We've invested over $11 million in commitments to that end to date. In the face of climate chaos, challenges of food and nutrition access, and diminishing and degraded natural resources, we really need more seed innovators, not more centralized seed innovation. So I want to share with you a few examples of where I see optimism in what people I call seed heroes, people I've worked with for almost 20 years now. This is Frank Morton, who bred outrageous lettuce. He doesn't have a PhD in crop genetics, but his seeds are sold around the world by very large seed companies, not only grown on the space station. Why? Because Frank has an interesting approach to plant breeding. He's not really breeding for space. He's breeding for a planet that's full of more and more challenges, and he's breeding for all of us. Frank's approach is an open source approach. If patents and concentration are a closed fist grasping at ownership and control and fighting against others to innovate with their crop genetics, Frank is the opposite. We've all seen that photo of a calloused, soil-stained hand offering seeds. That is Frank's approach, this open sharing of his knowledge and his crop genetics with all. He trains other farmers in plant breeding. And his approach for breeding is to put his seeds through what he calls hell's half acre. He has, for each of his crops, a special half acre that's ridden with disease. He inoculates it with disease, that's full of weeds and pests. And he selects the seeds to be workhorses, to perform well in the harshest of environments, not just space, but the harsh environments we have with climate chaos. This is why NASA and University of Wisconsin selected his seeds, not because he's a nice, generous guy. One of the crops that Frank breeds that we've been funding for some years is quinoa. Now, we know quinoa is an Andean crop, but quinoa also can be grown here in the United States. And it's a wonderful crop to be breeding for ecological stress because it does well with high salinity soils in extreme environments. So we started a program breeding quinoa with Frank and Washington State University. And to date, there's now thousands of acres of quinoa being produced in the state of California and commercialized by Lundberg. Lundberg, who sells rice and also sells a variety of snack products. Now we're actually growing Frank's genetics in quinoa and commercializing that. Lundberg is a competitor of Clif Bar. Clif Bar funded all of this work. You might ask why. That doesn't make business sense. In our perspective, there's a place for businesses to compete, and there's a place for businesses to cooperate. And when it comes to diversifying our crop genetics and offering more opportunities for farmers, the answer is simple. Cooperation wins the day. This is Steve Jones. He's a professor of wheat breeding at Washington State University in a program that's called the Bread Lab. He breeds grains, not just wheats, a variety of grains. Steve recognizes that grains were once an intrinsic part of all farming systems in the United States. Whether you're a vegetable farmer, cotton farmer, whatever you do, you want to rotate your crops with grains because grains replenish the nutrients in the soil. They break disease cycles. They're very important from an ecological perspective in whole integrated farming systems. But in his area of Washington State, the western side, the vegetable producers in that area and the seed and tulip producers in that area stopped growing grains. Why? Because the conventional commodity system didn't want to buy their 100 or 200 acres of small grains. They didn't fit their model of growing, and yet they needed to grow grains. So Steve started breeding grains that would do well in their system, but also have economic return. He started breeding for local terroir. He started working with Dan Barber and other chefs to select varieties that had interesting flavor profiles so that local bakers would want to use these grains. He started working with local beer makers in the Seattle area to work on local terroir for barley malts so that they would use these crops. And to date, there's over $10 million of milling and malting and processing activity all going around the small organic breeding program at Washington State University, the Bread Lab. We fund 5 graduate students, PhD students in Steve's program. And one of the reasons I love his program is they don't just work in the field breeding new grain varieties, oats, barley, wheat. They actually get into the lab, the Bread Lab. And they work with chefs. They work with food companies like King Arthur Flour. This is actually Representative Benet from Washington State working in the lab. And they learn how their crops and the genetics in the field translate into quality traits that consumers care about. That's the kind of integrated seed solution that we're proud to be a part of funding. Now, these two are examples of people that I've worked with for many years that we fund, but there's another seed hero that I want to share a little bit about, someone who I would love to meet but have not yet had the honor. This is Mary Abokutsu Anyango. She's sometimes called the mother of indigenous vegetables in Kenya. She's standing here in a field of African Solanaceae nightshade in Jomo Kenyatta University near Kenya. She grew up eating these greens and has led efforts to study their nutritional benefits and to repopularize these vegetables in Africa. This is at a time when many food aid projects are trying to get African farmers to grow biofortified corn that's been biofortified for more carotene in the corn, which is good. It's a healthy, nutritious thing to have more carotene in the corn. The problem is it's a bright, day-glow orange corn that doesn't do well in the marketplace because it's not a part of the cultural diet of the people of her community. And so it's not used and it's not eaten. Meanwhile, their indigenous crops have been neglected. So Mary and a group of scientists, they're not just trying to reintroduce heritage varieties, they're studying these varieties and they're breeding and improving them for disease resistance and pest resistance so that they can once again be an integrated part of a healthy and nutritious diet for the people of Kenya. Now, there's one thing that all three of these seed heroes share. They have open, cooperative, networked model of sharing. They have transparency, and they get input from all stakeholders, from consumers to farmers. Everyone is a part of the solution in the conversation. I'm inclined to feel trust and to feel optimistic about our food future if we can have more Franks and Steves and Marys. It's not that I think the big ag chemical gene giants are intrinsically evil. I have good friends who work for those companies, and they have done some solid breeding work in many crops. But the simple truth is that plant breeding is an investment in what tomorrow's agriculture and food will be. And the golden rule of successful financial investing is diversification. Simply put, diversification. Overinvesting in one single area is not only risky, but it actually decreases the likelihood for successful future returns. The same investment philosophy is true in finance as it is in food. It's well past time that we reconsider how we invest in progress in problem solving when it comes to plant breeding and seed. Who are the decision makers? Who's invited to the table? Who are the active participants in developing our food future? When it comes to seed solutions, the success will not be measured by quarterly returns of a few mega corporations. Success will be measured by succession, by how we hand off our soil, our water, our farms, our knowledge, our seed. Will we leave these resources better than when we took them on? Will they be degraded or diversified? Will we add value or not? The diversity and resiliency of life that we have here on this earth, in my opinion, was not created in a competitive system that is a zero-sum game, in which there are one winner who takes all. That is not the evolutionary story that I see. That's Wall Street's interpretation of evolution, and it's a twisted interpretation. Because the beauty and the life of communities of organisms on this planet, and the way they've spread across this planet, were really created as the result of solutions that are rooted in interaction, in mutual dependence, and in sharing. So I invite you all to learn more about diverse seed systems, decentralized seed systems, and the heroic people who are working on solutions for all, and to share that knowledge with others. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. And now, Jeremy Jackson.
Hi, I'm speaking for Hoyt Peckham, who's had a child just born gravely ill, and he couldn't come to the meeting. He asked me to begin by asking two questions. First of all, how many of you in the audience eat fish and enjoy fish? I'd like you to raise your hand. So virtually all of you. So the second question is, how many of you, when you eat fish, think about fraud and think about slavery? Seriously, how many of you actually really think about it? Because the fact of the matter is that seafood fraud is rampant, and much of seafood production is literally based on modern slavery in the 21st century. An astounding statistic is that in my hometown, 60% of all seafood that was sold in Manhattan in 2012 was fraudulently labeled. It was a different species from a different place. How do we know that? We know that from genetics. You just go into a restaurant, you stick a little piece of fish in your pocket, you bring it back, you sequence it with DNA, and you find out that it really isn't red snapper from the Gulf of Mexico. It's some goddamn thing from Chesapeake Bay or wherever, and that's just the way it works. And that's a low figure in New York, because in the rest of the world, where there aren't the same kinds of at least quasi-consumer protections, the problem is just rampant. And whatever they want to sell is what you get. Now, you could ask, if it tastes good, why should you care? I think none of us likes to be ripped off, you know. I mean, there's this sort of basic concept of trust. But we really need to know what we're eating and where it came from for an awful lot of reasons that pertain to the environment, and they also pertain to our own health. I mean, they relate to whether or not you're eating an overfished species, whether you're eating a fish that it can only be obtained from, you know, terrible bycatch problems, what kind of habitat damage is done by dragging the bottom or something like that, and also irresponsible agriculture. And I'm standing here as a living example of another reason, which is health, because if I eat one tiny, tiny, tiny bit of a shrimp or a crab or a lobster, I have 60 minutes or I'll die. And there's no notion of what kind of stuff is being mixed in, not to mention species like king mackerel, which are just, you know, mercury deposits of incredible concentration that get sold as innocent fish. And for children, that's a huge health risk in development, especially in communities where a lot of fish is eaten. And then there's this issue of slavery, which is rampant in the fishing community. I've seen it working in Nicaragua as a scientist and seen ships coming over from Honduras with enslaved lobster divers with a life expectancy of about 30. And this is just going on in front of and that's a huge amount of the spiny lobster that's eaten in the United States. And it's not to say that lots of things haven't been done to try to address these problems. The last 10 years have seen real advance, but it's a huge problem. And so Hoyt put in this picture of this woman he knows, Lorena Luna, who in Mexico City has just simply stopped eating fish because in Mexico she says, I have no way of knowing what I'm eating and how good it is. Now, from the point of view of the fisher, there's another enormous problem, which is the fact that, and especially in Baja California where Hoyt works, the fishermen are far away from any market. They're utterly the prisoner of middlemen who are unethical and pay them very little. And that's the only way they can sell their fish. And it's so bad that this guy, Jose, who actually has become a major figure in Hoyt's program, and I'm going to tell you about in a minute, was able to make 40% more collecting used Coca-Cola bottles for recycling for plastic than he could make from selling the beautiful fish that he was catching, because of the middleman problem. And so you get this vicious cycle. Since they're making so little, they fish too much, so you have overfishing. And the Gulf of California is catastrophically overfished in many places. The exceptions prove the rule. Now, Hoyt, I first met Hoyt when he was doing this amazing program to try and stop sea turtle bycatch. And he came to realize that he couldn't just work in Mexico because the same turtles were then going to Hawaii. They were being hooked by the longline tuna fishers. Then they were going to Japan and Southeast Asia where there was egg predation and blah, blah, blah. So he actually created this program where he brought together active fishers in Mexico, Japan, and Hawaii, brought them to the different places, and that resulted in a quite remarkable program that has made quite a difference in sea turtle survival and minimizing bycatch. But an accidental thing happened to him when he was doing that, which was that he'd never been to Japan, and he walked into a Japanese seafood market, and he saw the quality of the fish, and he saw the incredible sophistication of the buyers who didn't want anything but the very, very, very best product. And he knew that just put Mexico to shame. And so what he did was with that revelation, was to do two things, and to develop a culture in Mexico that would produce seafood of the same quality that he saw in Japan and do it sustainably. And then the second thing was to create out of nothing the markets will allow the fishermen in their co-ops to sell this high-quality fish, which they were catching sustainably, and make a profit. And it's an incredible story, and I wish he were here to tell you, because he started it in 2013. It's a 4-year-old program, and it has totally taken off in Mexico. So it's a hybrid enterprise. The first aspect is the NGO, Smartfish NGO. I'm forgetting about the slides, which works on issues of sustainability, how much catch, handling of the catch, the processing, and all that, so that the fishermen will produce something which is really good. The bottom line is no more nets. No more damage and spoiling of fish that are out, poorly cooled on the water for a day or two and then brought back in. But using hook and line and catching individual fish and treating each individual fish in the kind of way that you would serve in your restaurant. And that includes doing things like bleeding the fish and immediately putting it on ice and whatever. So the pile of stuff which rots on the boat versus individually caught and doing it. And I have to admit that this picture really took me by surprise, because those two fish, the pink one and the white one, are the same species of fish, caught in the same day by the same guy. The one on the left has not been bled. It hasn't been treated properly. It hasn't been immediately placed in cool. The one on the right has had all those wonderful things done. And it's too bad, I've smelled the difference and I've tasted the difference. It's extraordinary. And it all stems from this simple process of individual handling and all the rest. And it's paid off because he has become, this Smartfish thing has become a hot item for the highest class restaurants. My son was the lunch chef at Chanterelle for 10 years, and seafood was a very big part of what they did. And a huge part of his job was going out and knowing who was supplying the fish and who am I buying it from, and et cetera, et cetera. So discriminating chefs and consumers have made a market for it. So his first task has worked. He's actually created a new food which is not new in the species, but new in its quality and new in its sustainability and the way it's done. And so he can produce Japanese quality seafood in Mexico. Yes, they found buyers, but it's not to scale. And the markets are, in New York City and San Francisco, Mexico City. They're not in the huge coastal communities in that area that have a huge appetite for fish. And so in order to address that, what he did was he created the corporate side of Smartfish, which is Smartfish Incorporated, the purpose of which is to market this incredibly high-quality artisanal fish with full traceability and transparency, so that any purchaser knows through certification agencies what they're getting. In other words, fundamentally different from that problem in my hometown in New York, where 60% of the fish was fraudulent in 2012. And by the way, it's not much better yet. Okay, so what they do is, and they became, Smartfish Incorporated was the first exclusive provider of responsible seafood in the entire country of Mexico. And he's done all this in 4 years. And they're getting, and it's really starting to work for markets. So there's some very famous celebrity chefs in Mexico, like Juan Pablo Loza, who has boutique restaurants, and they're using exclusively Smartfish products. National Geographic on all of its ecological cruises is doing it, and et cetera. And now, and this is the most important, last week, a major retailer called Sam's Club has launched their fish in 40 stores all across Mexico. That happened last week. It's like cool, right? Okay, so this is it's really a triple impact thing. They're artisanal, they're traceable, they're responsible. Their clients are boutique, they're hospitality, they're retail. And the really important thing is that the fishers are earning the same or more money by producing this stuff, by catching less fish and making more money for catching less fish. They're doing it to the standards of Smartfish, and they're also employing the women in the community mostly. I don't know why it's a picture of a guy talking about new jobs for women, but in fact this has empowered employment in the region, because now there's all the processing is being done locally, and so there's more money in the community. I don't know how I'm doing through time, so I'm just going to quick go on. The huge question, of course, is scalability. It's the problem of really good seeds that are made by the right person versus Monsanto, and there are three sort of critical enabling conditions that need to be met to scale this up really well. The first is fisheries management, and I got to tell you, in Mexico, that's still a big problem. The second is empowerment of responsible fishing groups and sort of getting this linked to the big boys like Blue Ventures and the Pole and Line Foundation that can provide financing models and whatever to scale this up. And also, you know, making sure that you have affordable third-party evaluation and certification. You may have all heard of the Marine Stewardship Council. It cost a fortune to get certified by them. And in my humble opinion, they're basically an industry organization. So for the people who are actually really trying to do good and do it to scale and all the rest of it, they have this huge problem. It might cost them $100,000 to be certified, you know, and they can't do that. Okay. So there's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of really good stuff. There's something called Compesca, which is an initiative of the Mexican government, which is actually really moving towards producing sustainable food. We've got a couple of decades of progress by the major NGOs of the Conservation Alliance for Seafood Solutions, and Smartfish is working to extend that to the Southern Hemisphere. And you can sort of see the evidence of all this in the annual Seafood Summit, where you get the titans of industry, the Monsantos of fish sticks and Alaskan pollock, who now come to these meetings to show off their sustainability. And what Hoyt has created is like really good in that thing. Okay, I'm done. I just want to finish up by a plea that Hoyt made. You know, his project is amazing. I think we can all agree. He has accomplished in 4 years something that nobody else had done, and he did it all because he went to Japan. But no matter what he does, this program will succeed or fail as a function of us. And what our attitude is and how discriminating. You know, there's this wonderful program in Greenpeace that shamed a lot of supermarkets into actually showing what they were selling and where it came from. And you should ask that question every time you go into a store. And when the person behind says, I don't know, you say, well, I'm sorry, then I can't buy the fish. And we have to do this, because if we don't do this and if we don't keep up the pressure, then these things are all going to die. It's nice, cutesy stuff, and we'll go back to everything like normal. I think you would all agree this is great progress in an industry which has suffered greatly. And if you heard Ayanna Johnson talk this morning about the issues of coastal conservation and whatever, it's absolutely key. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jeremy. That's an extraordinary story. Now we're going to open this up to some of our other panel members. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions of the panel, and then they can also jump in and ask the questions of each other as well. So I wanted to start with Nora. Just Nora, you know, you've spent your whole life finding organic solutions to things. You started worrying about all these things in the 60s. When you listen to these stories up here now, how does this relate to the work you've been doing?
Well, I think I'm so happy that that's done now. You know, it's luckily it's only candy.
That's right.
So, it is. I think the biggest problem is to be informed, and I think with the two speakers, what was wonderful is that they really informed you. I think I found out with the restaurant when I started to do organic food that nobody had any idea what it meant, and nobody knew where the food came from and how it was grown and raised. And still now, many people, really the sentence when they say they think milk grows in a carton, I mean, I think unfortunately it's still a lot true. So I think these two speakers said something that, I don't know, out of instinct, or perhaps it was the hippie time of the 60s and the 70s that brought us back to nature. But when I came to this country, I sort of instinctively knew that the agricultural practices in this country were very wrong. I mean, for me, it was just looking around and seeing how people were unhealthy, had so many health problems that, you know, cancer, when I'm, as you might have detected from my accent, I'm Austrian. My kids make fun of me and say I sound like Arnold, but I don't think that's true. But anyway, I grew up, you know, if there was cancer, it was like the front page of the newspaper, and you know, health, to take care of your health was always the first thing. And so when my father always said, health is the most important thing you have in your life, you better take care of it, because no money in the world can buy it for you. And when I came to this country, as a kid, of course, I said, oh, yeah. But when I came to this country, I realized that the health problems have a lot to do with the food that people put in their bodies and the water that they drink and the air. And so I started with a cooking school, and then with the restaurant, saying, I want to show people how to do it in a more healthful way. And I think I was the first that actually drove out to the countryside to find farmers that raised food in a more sustainable way and in a more natural way. And I supported the local farmers in the 70s, and I always asked questions, you know, what did you do? What did you have to do to fight the insects? I mean, this area, unfortunately, is a very difficult area because of our humidity in the summer, so fungicides is used very heavily here. And some crops cannot even be grown here, like fruit, without having a lot of the blemishes, and then people don't want to buy them because there are all these spots on apples. So also there is a farmer. I started also a producer-only farmers market in Washington. I started it 20 years ago at DuPont Circle with, should say I initiated it. There has not been a producer-only farmers market in Washington, which means that actually the farmer that grows and raises the food is there in the market, and he sells only the food that he actually raises, which is a big difference that was before. And there we have this one farmer, Heinz from Next Step Froze, who does exactly that with his grain. He's a grain farmer. So I think it has come in the right direction. Talking about fish, that was another thing that I became aware of. I was the person that started with Seaweb, give swordfish a break, because swordfish was nearly extinct in this country. It was because it was fished heavily off the coast of South Carolina, where the breeding ground is of the fish. And, again, people have no idea, but I think it's 7 years that the swordfish has to be 7 years old before they can reproduce, correct? And so, it's really informing people about their food, and as you said, where it comes from, and to ask the right questions. I think that's what I did. That's how I started. And, the restaurant, yeah.
Let me break in right there where your food is coming from, because we have Rachel Bynum from Waterpenny Farm in Rappahannock. Rachel, just jump in now.
Yeah, I have. This has been a really interesting thing to be part of, and I wanted, the first thing that really I keyed in on was when Matthew was speaking about cooperation and about growing farms and growing trust among people who are in the same group versus separation. And I'd like to talk a little bit. 20 years ago, I was working on a vegetable farm in Northern Virginia called Wheatland Vegetable Farms. 18 years ago, we started Waterpenny Farm. So we sold at an even older farmers market than the DuPont Circle Market in Tacoma Park, Maryland. It's run collectively by the farmers and it's still run collectively by the farmers. the DC area markets, the trend has been for nonprofit organizations to start running the farmers markets, and Tacoma Park is, I don't know what it is, but we're staunchly independent, and we're self-run, we're a cooperative rather than being run by a nonprofit. And that's been the attitude that I carried from Chip and Susan Plank, where we started to farm from. They told us every single thing about what they did and their methods, all their numbers. We were we were apprentices of theirs for several years. We've carried that forward, and we talked, a second speaker spoke about growth, and that's sort of, people are always asking us, so how are you growing? How are you growing? You've been doing this for so long. How are you expanding your business? The answer is that each year we have interns who work on our farm. They work for above minimum wage. We provide them housing. They're not interns in the sense of being unpaid. They're interns in the sense of having a true internship experience. They learn. We visit other growing farms in the area. They do a tremendous amount of work also and get a lot of hands-on experience on the farm. Over the course of our 18 years, there have been 6 new farms similar to ours started. We're teaching about soil as a renewable resource. That just a couple weeks ago, I was at Rappahannock County Elementary School with all the 3rd graders, and we brought in some of our interns there. They learn about, it's part of their standards of learning in Virginia to learn about soil in 3rd grade, which is kind of neat that it is part of the standards of learning. I think that's wonderful. It's not a standard, however, to actually smell what good soil smells like, to have that hands-on experience. We were able to bring bring compost in, bring soil in, bring examples of the regimen of cover crops that we grow on our farm, and the students, they love the smell of soil. There have been a lot of interesting studies done about the physiological need that we have to smell living soil, and that's one of the things that I learned hands-on growing up, and also working at another farm and passing on. I think that the reason that I'm optimistic about the future here is, for one thing, we're not talking about growing and expanding and expanding. We raise 10 acres of vegetables. We always will. We might grow less. Our goal is to have half of our farm in cover crops every given season, half of our farm growing food crops, because that's the most sustainable way for us. It also makes our life more balanced if we're carefully tending fewer acres and we're able to have enough on less. That's what we're all hoping for, right? We're all hoping to have a balance in our lives and not keep on feeling pressed and lower our quality of life while we're not going to our kids' soccer games. I just wanted to say one more thing though, because the thing about the scale is that having 6 other farms that are started similar to our farms, it grows our own community. It grows a sense of pride in being part of the local food movement and having direct contact with our cooperatives, like at the farmers markets, which is something you can't replicate by growing larger and larger. It works well in this region. If you're in Mexico, you need to cooperate and collective. This is just what works in our region with the abundance.
Let me just ask you to follow on with that.
Yeah.
And you've done pioneering work on ethnic gardening. How does this fit in to this whole sphere?
Well, it's all about food. And my story is about what food means to everyone, regardless of where you find yourself in the world. And at our college, the College of Agriculture, Urban Sustainability, and Environmental Sciences, mouthful, but in short, causes, at the University or District of Columbia, we identified an issue. The issue is that of a growing immigrant population around the Washington, D.C. metro area. And these people, I am sorry to say that with all the food in America, they find themselves in a food desert, only because they don't have their home foods. And so they're looking for their home foods, and we are working to address that home food issue by doing what? Researching. See how can these foods adapt to the climate of this area, and to see how they produce, and to also attach sustainability to the growing of these foods. And so we reach out. We are really working in an urban agriculture method, and we're using several methods to grow food in small places. And so that the population in Washington, of course, Washington, D.C. is not an agricultural town, but we are making sure that the people can use whatever small places they are in the city to grow food for themselves. And using and beautifying the city as well. But a lot of research has to be done in terms of the information that we put out there has to be research-based information.
What are some of the crops that they're growing in DC?
Well, we grow many local crops, but the crops that I particularly specialize in are the, I'd call a name, say garden eggs. Garden eggs are compared to eggplants. There are varieties of eggplants. And a lot of people, I thought only West Africans ate garden eggs, but now found out differently. A lot of people from different parts of the world eat garden eggs as well. And so jute leaf, for instance, molochia, for instance, these are some of the plants that we are studying. Lots of hot peppers. You'll be surprised to know how many people eat hot peppers. And we are studying such leafy greens as avuvo, hibiscus, and so, you know, introducing this. These are plants that people already eat, but they are new foods in these areas because they were not eaten before.
So could we eventually have hibiscus Clif bars? Something like that?
Yes, yes, yes.
Certainly an
Yes.
eggplant savory one would be fun.
Yeah.
Oran, let me just go to you for 1 second, which is there's a phenomenon in this country now where half the people are highly aware of food issues. They're looking for organic foods. They're trying to grow special things. And then there's another part of the population that do not have access to these things. How do we fix this problem?
You know, Leslie, I think about what we used to call the digital divide.
Pull the mic.
The digital divide, those who have access to technology and those who don't. And while that may no longer be a big issue, the nutritional divide certainly is. And it leads to real health disparities. Or I think about what used to be redlining around home ownership in low-income communities. While that's no longer legal, nutritional redlining is alive and well. It creates a big gap in this country. You know, I'm less concerned about great food in the highest end restaurants. I'm more concerned about the kids in Flint, Michigan, who now not only are getting lead in their water, but I'm learning today, they may be getting lead when they eat fish and not knowing about it. So the solution that we've come up with at Fair Food Network is called Double Up Food Bucks. And we basically double the buying power of low-income families when they spend their food assistance money, their food stamp or SNAP money, on locally grown fruits and vegetables. Works very simply. Shopper who has their food assistance comes to a farmer's market, they spend $20 of their food assistance money, they go home with $40 worth of locally grown produce. We call it a win-win-win. Low-income families taking home more healthy food, farmers making more money and getting new customers, and I know Rachel has used the program in her farmer's market, and those food dollars staying in the local economy to create jobs and economic development. So this idea is at the heart of Fair Food Network, the organization that we founded back in 2009, but it's now grown from just initially 5 farmers markets in Detroit to over 200 farmers markets, and now grocery stores throughout the state of Michigan, and we're now working with partners in 20 other states to expand this program. It's really, incentives can really be a game changer. When you hear about Farm Bill, right, which is a little bit opaque to many of us, but you hear about Farm Bill, most of us think about, subsidies to corporate farms. In reality, 80% of all the money that flows through the U.S. Department of Agriculture that's authorized in that Farm Bill is food assistance, is food stamps, $75 billion a year. So for us to think about how we can take a portion of those funds, a huge resource, and target it to healthier eating and supporting local farmers and the local food system economy at the same time, it's really the win-win-win that can have a big impact on the system. What I like to say is, we have a choice here. We can either pay the farmer now or the doctor later. And Double Up Food Bucks helps us pay the farmer now and not the doctor later.
Yeah, and it's the only part of the Farm Bill that actually goes towards encouraging people to eat the kinds of foods that will make everybody healthier. So it's an important part, and that's one of the things that it has been sort of targeted for cuts, but it's something that has the triple benefit, as you're saying.
Something we need to keep alive and well in the future public policy world.
Yeah. We also have a partnership with the Capital Area Food Bank that's targeting even lower income people, where we raise money from our generally wealthier shareholders towards shares for CSA shares for people at the food bank, and they do a lot of education around how to use greens or herbs you might not have used, or other more nutritious foods. So it's a good program, and one that can be a challenge for lower income people to have access to the.
Matthew, do you want to jump in?
I was just going to say, from a policy
Mike?
perspective, you're both talking about something that, there were a lot of hopes in the upcoming Farm Bill that Debbie Stabenow, the senator from Michigan, was going to be able to get a new title in the Farm Bill. As Secretary Vilsack, Secretary of Agriculture, departed, he encouraged that there be an urban agricultural title in the Farm Bill that specifically supported the growing of food in urban environments to help improving food access. Not just backyard gardens, but actually farms where people could sell their food to their local neighbors. Now, given the current political climate, that might be tough in this Farm Bill, but I don't want us to lose hope. And I think Senator Stabenow will still make some strides in that area. We may not get a full title, but this is progressive agriculture. Progressive innovation isn't just shiny ag tech tools. Progressive innovation is also rediscovering things that we've known for a long time, which is that urban centers can get multiple benefits from greening and growing food. It, first of all, provides biophilia, like a beautiful place that people feel happier to live in these urban areas. It provides food that's highly localized and nutritious, fresh, and it can provide jobs and resources in those communities as well. So as we move into the Farm Bill, if you're involved in advocacy or you want to speak out, I think these kind of urban, the networking of the Food Bill and the Farm Bill together, urban agriculture is one of those areas where we really should be pushing to
Matt,
do it.
tough but not impossible.
Yep.
For all of us sitting up here, I mean, we're not neophytes. We've all been at this for a long time, and if we shied away from this work when it got tough,
we'd be done.
We wouldn't have a panel today.
Yeah.
So that's why at the University of District of Columbia, we've taken a lead.
Yeah, I'll pull the
In-
mic close.
We've taken a lead in creating food hubs. We call them food hubs, where we are teaching people how to grow these foods, also how to process the food, how to market the food, and also how to make use of the reject, and making compost out of whatever trash is left out of food, so that we are having a whole total circle of how to treat food and having respect for food, and that's what we're doing. We have 5 centers across the city now, plus our large, over 20,000 square feet of rooftop garden at the university. So I think we are doing something. We are using all kinds of methods and growing these foods. Aquaponics, which is a combination of growing fish and using the fish water to grow healthy food, and also hydroponics. Now one thing that the farmers have a problem with is post-harvest issues. After you grow the food and you have the surplus, what do you do with it? You have to do something with it. We lose a lot of money and food, which hurts that way. But now we are using solar energy to create coolers so that food can be conserved after harvest.
Can, if anyone in this room wants to come and see some of that at the university, can they
Yes.
organize to do that?
Of course, we are open. We have a research farm in Beltsville. We are in District of Columbia, but we have a farmland in Beltsville where the totality of the whole thing is. But you can come to our campus on Connecticut Avenue and see for yourself what we are doing.
Should we open it up to questions? Would you, do we have any questions? There are microphones, so if you'd like to start, just come up to a mic. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is John, and I was just going to ask a question about the fish program in Mexico and how wide the program is in terms of global fishing. I come from Africa, and most of the African fish is not really used by the African people because they have this big fish programs, this big fish equipment that comes and get all the fish and then take it away, and the local fishermen really don't have anything left. So I was wondering if that program is actually going.
Well, so the program in Mexico that Hoyt began is centered only in Baja California, but that's a vast area, and the Gulf of California is very large, and it's an area that has suffered from acute overfishing, and there are various initiatives that have been building in the area. I know a fair amount about fisheries in Kenya. I mean, there are two situations. On the one hand, you have the artisanal coastal fisheries that are still going with depleted resources, and so very much like the situation in Mexico. But then you also have the big industrial fishing and the selling of the rights, and there's an issue of corruption in governments, which actually is worst in West Africa, where in fact virtually all of the fisheries resource comes here. And one of the reasons people in the United States have no idea of the problem of overfishing is because there's really this super abundance of cheap fish in the United States. But you have to ask, where did it come from? And if you ask that question, then you find out that in a Costco, for example, about 80 to 90% of the fish they're selling does not originate in the United States at all. It comes from West Africa or Antarctica or God only knows where, but it's not us. But we don't think about it because we still get it and it's cheap.
But could you eventually start a Smartfish in Africa?
Well, absolutely. There's a wonderful program through the Wildlife Conservation Society centered just south of Mombasa with a couple who she's Kenyan and he's American, and they have they've created his name is Tim McClanahan and she's Nawira Muthiga, and their program to try and achieve the same kinds of things is internationally famous, and I would actually urge you to check that out.
What's it called?
It's the Wildlife Conservation Society, but what they're doing, and in a sense they didn't have the smarts of the incorporation that Hoyt had. So they're the research organization promoting conservation in the fisheries community, but they're incredibly highly regarded in the Kenyan
Well, another issue too is that the governments don't have enough resource to patrol their waterways, and so these trailers, the Chinese, the Portuguese, they are all taking fish as they want to.
Yeah, and especially in the offshore fisheries.
Yes.
I mean, in the nearshore stuff, well, Ayanna Johnson mentioned the extraordinary case of Cabo Pulmo. You don't want to be a fisherman from another community, go in there and violate their ban on fishing because you might come to an unhappy conclusion, and it works really well, you know. And so but you have to have that dedication to self-patrolling and the rest.
Do you want to ask next question?
Sure. Hi, I have a question mostly about the research that you mentioned. There are actually two parts of the question. First, you said that you have a rooftop, you do hydroponics and aquaponics, and I was wondering if you've explored the options of vertical indoor growing as well.
Well, of course, it all ties in the same
Right, but I mean the
issue.
not
Indoor.
the
We have
indoor
hoop houses.
small space adaptation, because you talked about that a lot. So I wonder if you are exploring with the new technology, sort of like Aerofarms does, for example. And then the second part of the question was, you mentioned that you're mostly looking into produce that's not usual in this region. So when you said you're looking into adaptation for local conditions, does that include just ways of growing, or does it include actually modifying the original seed, sort of going back to that seed debate? Thanks.
Well, then let me start from the second question. We are using original seeds. Of course, we propagate our own seeds from the original, and we are looking at adaptability of these crops. We are watching them to see what types of issues they have, pest issues, and as well as resiliency. And we find out that they actually, I was farming in Africa before coming here, and I find out that some of the crops that I grow here they like cooler and damper weather than they did in Africa. So I have had more success with some of the crops right here than they did in Africa.
Can you name one or two of those?
Yes, my garden eggs, my peppers, and the hibiscus. They do very well. They produce. They're abundant. When it's getting to October and where we are looking for them to die, that's where they are producing flowers, but then the first frost comes and takes them away. And so the other question about vertical farming is all tied in urban agriculture. For the time being, what we are doing is that we're growing things in hoop houses, extending growing seasons so that of course, we do have the technology to grow vertically. There's nothing strange or new about urban agriculture.
I was going to say on those different varieties that they're trying to grow from primarily immigrant communities that are bringing them in, a lot of that germplasm is highly elastic still. Heirlooms are not like a static thing that we keep, people think of it as, oh, it's what my grandma planted. But no, seeds every generation either progress or they regress. And you either can keep improving them and adapting them or not. Plant breeding at its very basics is usually taking two very different populations and making crosses and finding new materials. But you can do a basic form of plant breeding or crop improvement when you have very elastic germplasm, as most heritage seeds are, and you begin to look for specific traits and kind of herd those traits into a new form. It might not be radically new from it might even look the same as what you've always grown, but it starts to have very distinct traits that have been adapted for. And I think that's one of the trends that we're seeing, is that the heirloom movement is letting go of some of their mystique that heirlooms are sacred, and they're starting to actually work on improving those crops and using basic breeding techniques for the challenges and the interests that we have today, including indoor. And I can talk to you later about indoor breeding because there's folks working on it.
Do you want to ask your question?
Sure. I was wondering, given that there is so much fear around GMOs here in the States and also in other parts of the world, what are some of the most sustainable ways to create or farm or work with GMOs?
To work with.
To use them, you mean?
Or create them, or breed them?
Well, I think there's a lot of confusion about what a GMO is, and what, if you're talking about genetic engineering, it's transgenic technology where you're introducing new DNA, or new methods like CRISPR gene editing, where you're simply kind of turning off genes that already exist within crops. I try to avoid the GMO debate. To be honest, I feel like it sucks the energy out of the food movement. And I think we've wasted a lot of dollars fighting for labeling and Monsanto, fighting against Monsanto, and that the food movement, the organic movement, the urban movement, the sustainable food movement for highly nutritious crops would be better served by investing their energy, their conversations, and their dollars in improving the crops that we want to use through the methods that we feel comfortable with. So in classical plant breeding, like Steve Jones' department, they use genomics. One of the students we fund in Steve's program just bred a new species. He crossed a goat grass with a wheat to create a new perennial wheat that is a new species. He did it using classical methods and forcing pollen to transfer across these species, and it's hard to get done, but he did it. And I think we have to embrace that type of innovation and look at our improved understanding of sequencing and genetic linkages in any way we can. Whether you choose to do that using transgenics or not, it's up to the company, the organization, the entity, and then it's up to the consumer to choose if they feel comfortable with those systems or not. I don't like to have any value judgments around it, to be honest. I feel like a diversity of choices and a diversity of methodologies are good.
Rachel, do you want to?
Yeah, I just would like to say that if you take a tomato plant, an identical tomato plant, you put one in a vertical gardening system that's completely hydroponic, you take another one and you put it in a healthy soil ecosystem that includes a diversity of perennial plants, that includes a diversity of pollinators, that includes the 7 billion microbes that should exist in a healthy cup full of soil. The necessity, in my mind, of any kind of genetic modification just flies out the window. I mean, on our farm, in the 18 years that we've been here, we have found that we're growing a huge diversity of all open pollinated and classically generated crops. Nothing is genetically modified. And we are able, because we grow 30 different kinds of tomatoes, some years one variety outshines the rest, other years they don't. But what we've found is that by building our soil organic matter from less than 1% to 4% over the course of our time, by continually cover cropping and using the existing ecology and enhancing it, that's the future. I mean, that is clearly the future. A huge proportion of the newly discovered species are found in the soil. That right now you can look at Rodell's website, other places. The soil is like more complex than the deep ocean. It's the new frontier of understanding, and it's right under our feet. And if we're not valuing that, I am not optimistic at all if we're not going to value the ecology that exists right here. And so I just would say, to me, genetically modified foods are like a silver bullet right to the brain in terms of what our Earth already has is diversity. And what we've done, just a quick story I'd like to tell is people talked a few years ago. Remember the brown mum-rated stink bugs? Who has those in their house? They were going to take over. They were going to kill everything. There weren't going to ever be any peaches again, and we weren't going to be able to grow peppers, or those dumb heirloom tomatoes that you're growing, they're so thin-skinned, you're never going to be able to grow them again because the stink bugs were going to kill them all. Well, just a few years back, we had the prime, entomologist at the University of Virginia come up looking and excited to see all the carnage that there was going to be with stink bugs. They found instead, it was hard to find the stink bug eggs on peppers, and they found a tiny wasp, little, like the size of a fruit fly there, stinging the stink bug eggs and ovipositing in there to take care of that problem for us. We didn't introduce that species. What we did was we kept the biodiversity around and on our farm. We have perennial crops growing, perennial flowers growing, native plants growing among our crops. We don't till our whole 8 acres at once. We do a strip tillage program where we do a fifth of an acre, Then there's another small amount that's not tilled. That way our native bees are able to nest in the soil. It's so complex, and deciding that you're going to choose one tiny aspect of one tiny germplasm does not work with our Earth's ecology, and I strongly believe that, and I hope that you all consider that perspective as you look at going forward.
How many
because-
people want to be interns at Waterpenny Farm?
I'm sorry.
Okay, next question.
First of all, thank you all for sharing. I really appreciated everyone's talk. I have a question specifically as someone who has worked in the food assistance space and with SNAP recipients. Have you been able to identify through your work, especially through the Double Value program, more novel strategies to engage those who feel that they might be disenfranchised or exploited by the food system?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and you have to, a whole variety of ways. I mean, working with communities that are affected by this, learning from them, having them get involved. I mean, probably the best example we have is our work in Flint, Michigan, which really ramped up after we all learned about the lead in the water, the thousands of kids that have been exposed to lead over a 1.5 to 2 year period, and then a need to mitigate the long-term negative impacts of that lead by improving the nutrition. But through working with organizations all throughout the community, through hiring some community members to actually be community organizers around this, we now have reached about 25% of the SNAP population in Flint are now using Double Up food bucks, which it's still not enough. It ought to be 100%, but 25% is a figure to be proud of when we look at other places where we've worked and where others have worked. I'm wondering if I can ask Matt a question.
Yep.
It seems to me that one of the issues, first of all, an assumption I have is that we're not going to either eat our way, shop our way, or cook our way into the resilient food system we need for the future. It's going to take us.
That's a neoliberal fantasy, but no.
It's going to take a systems approach, which means changes in public policy. And it seems to me one of the most important policy changes around the kind of work that you do is to get more public funding into genetic improvement and plant breeding, so that we're not forcing the system into all of this genetic improvement, or most of it happening with private companies, which gives us the kind of concentration you showed. If that's going to happen, you're not going to prevent that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about your ideas of what we can do to actually reinvigorate public funding of genetic improvement programs for public and open source varieties.
So there's a group of us, it's called Seeds and Breeds for 21st Century Agriculture. It's a group of public plant breeders from land-grant universities all around the country, different NGOs, citizens groups, religious groups, and we've been working on farm bills for about 12 years together. In the last farm bill, we had a win. We got some money within the NIFA program specifically for classical plant breeding. It was the first time NIFA had money specifically for land-grant universities to develop finished cultivars, finished varieties, classical plant breeding.
Congratulations, because that's a
Well,
huge win. Let
me tell you how much money we got. And we got it in the farm bill, first of all, but it wasn't,
Not enough.
It wasn't enough for it to be appropriated at the right level. We got $14 million. $14 million for all of the diversity of American agriculture in our land-grant universities. It wasn't even a drop in the bucket.
Right.
But it was something, and we're pushing again this farm bill, and we had Senator Baldwin, Tester, a variety of folks who have been champions for us. The question on genetic engineering, let's talk about return on investment. So we have $14 million coming in from this public program, our tax dollars. Meanwhile, we're spending literally $300, $400, $500 million a year on genetically engineering grass for biofuels, which has resulted in nothing.
You mean public funding?
Public funding, our tax dollars going to genetic engineering for there's no commercialization. It's been decades, and it's not activists stopping the commercialization. It just hasn't happened. We fall in love with shiny tools. That is the nature of the beast. That is the nature of the caveman, is to fall in love with shiny tools. And I'm not saying the tools shouldn't be used. I'm not judging the tools, but we've put all of our eggs in the biotech basket, and we have to reinvigorate public classical plant breeding. We're trying to We committed to funding 5 endowed chairs, $2 to $3 million each, at land-grant universities across the country. We're not doing it in crops that we specifically even use at Clif Bar. We just endowed a sweet corn breeder at University of Wisconsin, $2 million. We're doing it because we want to challenge other food companies to stop fighting about this and that and start investing. Every day, our company and everyone in this room, every day, we benefit from public sector research, from land-grant university agricultural research. We don't see it on our food bill. We don't see it at the restaurant bill. We don't see it on our spreadsheets at our company. But public plant breeders have bred varieties for local food systems, regional food systems. And if we don't give back to that system at a time when their budgets are falling, they will turn, because an act called By Dole has told them to turn for funding in this direction, they will turn to the private sector who wants them to breed specifically for patented traits. And the university, the small patent act that the universities have, allows the universities to go into patents with these seed companies, and that's who they're serving. They're not serving these diversified public interests. That has to shift. The single biggest thing we can do, and one of the things we're pushing for, is the reform of what is called the By Dole Act. And the By Dole, also called the University Small Patent Act, has shifted that funding model where it's not public tax dollars that pay for university research or positions, but it's private sector corporations. Now, we're a private sector corporation endowing these chairs. Our contract agreements, and I'm happy to share them with anyone because we consider them public and transparent, we don't own the germplasm. We don't tell the breeders what to breed. We don't tell them even the crops specifically. We let the universities, the local stakeholders, the farmers make those choices. And that's the system our country was founded on, the USDA was founded on. It was called the People's Department, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So Seeds and Breeds is one way to get involved in it, Oran. I'm happy to share information on that. It's run by the National Sustainable Ag Coalition now. But if you're an alumni from these schools, demand it of them. Demand that they go back to serving the public good. Their mission statement, university's mission statement, land grant, is to serve the sons and daughters of rural America. They are not doing that. They are serving shareholders of major corporations.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up. Thank you all for being here, and thank you all, fantastic panelists.